Most people believe their financial results are the outcome of their decisions. They're not. They're the outcome of something that makes those decisions before you even realize you're making them: your brain. And here's the uncomfortable part. Your brain was not designed to build wealth. It was designed to keep you safe, and those two goals are not the same. If your brain was optimized for financial growth, long-term investing would feel natural. Saving money would feel rewarding. Delaying. Gratification would feel easy, but it doesn't. Because your brain doesn't care about compounding. It cares about survival. And survival is short-term, immediate, reactive. It prioritizes certainty over growth, comfort over expansion, familiarity over opportunity. And every time you make a financial decision, those priorities are operating in the background, silently, automatically. This is why intelligent people stay financially stuck, not because they lack knowledge, not because they lack discipline, but because they are running a system that was never designed for the game they're trying to win. You think you're making rational decisions about money. You're not. You're making emotionally optimized decisions that feel rational after the fact. And your brain is extremely good at justifying them. You delay investing because it's not the right time. You keep money in low-growth environments because it feels safer. You avoid financial risks because you don't want to lose. All of that sounds logical, but it isn't optimized for wealth. It's optimized for emotional protection. And emotional protection has a cost that doesn't appear immediately, a cost that accumulates slowly, a cost that most people never calculate, because the real damage doesn't come from what you lose, it comes from what you never allow to grow. Every year you delay investing, every time you choose safety over opportunity, every moment you prioritize comfort over long-term gain. You're not just preserving your current state, you're reducing your future potential. And the most dangerous part is this: it doesn't feel like a mistake, it feels like responsibility, it feels like control, it feels like intelligence. That's how the pattern hides. Your brain rewards you for avoiding uncertainty. It gives you a sense of relief when you choose the safe option. It reduces anxiety when you delay difficult decisions. It creates a false sense of stability when you stay within familiar boundaries. But that relief is not free, it's financed by your future. And you don't notice the transaction because nothing visibly disappears. There's no loss notification, no negative balance, no immediate consequence. Just silence. But under that silence, something is happening. Time is passing. Opportunities are compounding without you. Markets are moving. Capital is growing somewhere else. And your money stays still. This is where the real asymmetry begins. Because wealth is not built in moments. It's built in trajectories. Small decisions, repeated consistently over long periods of time. But your brain is not wired to think in trajectories. It's wired to think in moments. Right now, today, this decision, this feeling. That's why long-term financial thinking feels unnatural, because you're trying to override a system that has been optimized for immediate survival for thousands of years, and most people never realize they're doing that. They think the problem is external, income, market conditions, opportunities, but the pattern is internal. And it's consistent. The same brain that helps you avoid danger is the same brain that avoids uncertainty in investing. The same brain that protects you from loss is the same brain that prevents you from taking calculated risks. And in the modern financial system, that protection becomes limitation, because wealth doesn't come from avoiding all risk. It comes from understanding which risks are necessary. And your brain doesn't make that distinction naturally. It treats uncertainty as danger, even when that uncertainty is required for growth. So what happens? You stay in environments that feel stable. You make decisions that reduce short-term stress. You optimize for predictability. And over time, you unknowingly optimize against wealth, because the conditions that feel safe in the short term are often the ones that limit growth in the long term. And the longer you operate under that pattern, the more it reinforces itself. You start to believe, I'm just being careful. I'm making responsible decisions. I'm avoiding unnecessary risk. But what you're actually doing is following a system that was never designed for financial expansion, and that system doesn't fail loudly. It fails silently, not in one big mistake, but in thousands of small decisions that all move in the same direction, away from growth, towards stability. And stability feels good, until you realize what it cost you. The problem is not that your brain is broken. The problem is that it's working exactly as it was designed to. Your brain evolved in an environment where uncertainty meant danger, where unpredictability could cost your life, where immediate threats mattered more than long-term outcomes. In that environment, hesitation could kill you. Taking risks without clear rewards made no sense. Preserving what you had was more important than trying to grow it. That logic kept you alive. But it doesn't build wealth. Because modern financial systems operate on a completely different set of rules. Wealth is not built by avoiding uncertainty. It's built by navigating it. It's built by allocating capital into environments where outcomes are not guaranteed, where volatility is normal, where short-term discomfort is the price of long-term growth. And this is where the conflict becomes unavoidable. Your biology is optimized for survival, but your financial success depends on growth. And those two systems are constantly pulling in opposite directions. Every time you consider investing, your brain scans for potential loss, not potential gain. Every time you think about allocating money into something uncertain, your brain prioritizes protection, not expansion. And the more uncertainty you perceive, the stronger that response becomes. This is why fear increases exactly when opportunity increases. When markets are unstable, when prices fluctuate, when outcomes are unclear, your brain interprets that as a signal to retreat. But financially, those are often the moments where growth is most accessible, and this creates a paradox that most people never resolve. The moments that feel the most dangerous are often the ones that matter the most. But your brain doesn't evaluate that. It reacts. It reduces exposure. It delays decisions. It waits for clarity. And clarity feels safe. But clarity is expensive, because by the time something feels safe, most of the growth has already happened. The risk is lower, but so is the return. And this pattern repeats itself over and over again. You wait, you observe, you delay. Then, when things stabilize, you act. But by then, you're no longer early. You're no longer positioned for exponential growth. You're positioned for incremental progress, and incremental progress feels acceptable. But it rarely changes your trajectory, because wealth is not built in stable environments. It's built in asymmetrical ones, where the upside is significantly larger than the downside, where uncertainty exists, but is compensated by potential growth, and your brain struggles to operate in that space. It prefers predictability. It prefers known outcomes. It prefers environments where it can reduce anxiety. Even if those environments produce lower financial results, that's the trade-off. And most people accept it without realizing it. They choose emotional stability over financial expansion, and they justify it with logic. I don't want to take unnecessary risks. I prefer to play it safe. I'll invest later when things are more stable. All of those statements feel reasonable, but they all point in the same direction: delay. And delay has a cost, not just in missed opportunities, but in lost time. And time is the one variable your brain consistently underestimates, because time doesn't trigger urgency, it doesn't create immediate discomfort, it doesn't demand action, so your brain deprioritizes it. But in financial terms, time is everything. Because time is what allows compounding to work. And compounding is not linear, it's exponential, which means its most significant impact happens later, not at the beginning. And this is where another invisible pattern emerges. Because the early stages of compounding feel insignificant, your brain doesn't value them. The growth looks small, the results look slow, the impact feels negligible, so it disengages. It looks for faster rewards, more immediate feedback, more visible progress. And when it doesn't find it, it shifts attention elsewhere. But that early stage is where everything starts. That's where the trajectory is built. That's where the system begins to compound. That's where the future outcome is quietly determined. And most people abandon it before it becomes visible, not because they lack discipline, but because their brain doesn't recognize its importance. It doesn't feel urgent, it doesn't feel rewarding, it doesn't feel necessary, so it gets ignored. And once again, a decision that feels harmless in the present creates a consequence that becomes irreversible in the future, because compounding doesn't just reward action, it punishes delay. And your brain is structurally biased toward delay. That's the pattern. And it doesn't need to be dramatic, it just needs to be consistent. A few years of hesitation, a few missed opportunities, a few decisions postponed. That's enough. Because by the time you realize what happened, the gap is already too large. Not because you made one catastrophic mistake, but because you followed a system that quietly moved you away from growth, every single time. At this point, most people reach for a simple explanation. They think the solution is discipline, more control, more effort. But that assumption creates another problem, because it treats behavior as the issue. When the issue is the system generating that behavior, you don't fail financially because you don't try hard enough. You fail because your default responses are misaligned with how wealth is actually built, and default responses are powerful. They don't require conscious effort. They don't require decision-making. They operate automatically, which means even when you know what to do, you often don't do it. Not because you're irrational, but because your brain is optimizing for something else. Consistency of emotion. Your brain is constantly trying to maintain a stable internal state. It wants to reduce stress, reduce uncertainty, reduce discomfort. And financial growth often requires the opposite: uncertainty, volatility, delayed rewards. So when those conditions appear, your brain intervenes. Not loudly, not dramatically, subtly. It makes small adjustments, small justifications, small delays, just enough to bring you back into a state that feels manageable. And those small adjustments accumulate. You check your investments too often. You react to short-term fluctuations. You hesitate when markets become unpredictable. You move capital to safer places too early. Each decision feels minor, insignificant, but they all share the same direction. They reduce exposure to growth, and that's how the system protects you, not from financial loss, but from emotional discomfort. And over time, that protection becomes a ceiling, because the same mechanism that reduces downside also limits upside, and this is where most people get trapped. They try to solve a structural problem with motivational solutions. They tell themselves, I need to be more disciplined. I need to stop overthinking. I need to be more consistent. But discipline doesn't override biology. It competes with it. And biology wins more often than people realize, not because it's stronger, but because it's constant. You can be disciplined for a week, maybe a month, but your brain is operating every second, and unless the system changes, the pattern returns. That's why people repeat the same financial behaviors for years. Even when they understand the consequences, they invest, then panic, then withdraw, then wait, then re-enter too late over and over again, not because they lack intelligence, but because their decisions are filtered through a system that prioritizes emotional stability. And emotional stability is not aligned with financial growth. Growth requires exposure. Exposure creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates discomfort. So the system intervenes again, and the cycle continues. This is why knowledge alone doesn't change outcomes. You can understand compounding, you can understand risk, you can understand long-term strategy. But if your brain is still optimizing for short-term comfort, your behavior will contradict that knowledge, and the contradiction will feel invisible. Because your brain will justify it, it will create explanations that make your decisions feel logical. This isn't the right time. I'll wait until things are clearer. I need more information. And those explanations will feel correct. Not because they are correct, but because they reduce internal tension. And reducing tension is your brain's priority, not building wealth. This is the hidden layer most people never see. They think financial success is about making better decisions, but it's not. It's about understanding the system that generates those decisions, because if the system stays the same, the decisions will repeat. Even if your intentions change, even if your knowledge improves, even if your income increases, the pattern remains, and the outcome follows. That's why some people earn more but don't build more, because income amplifies behavior. It doesn't correct it. If your system is optimized for short-term comfort, more money will only increase the scale of that pattern, not its direction. And this is where the real shift begins, because once you see the pattern, you can no longer explain your results the same way. It's no longer about bad luck, or lack of opportunity, or insufficient income. It's about the invisible system shaping your behavior. And that system has been there the entire time, quietly influencing every financial decision you make, without asking for your permission. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start to notice patterns that used to feel normal, decisions that felt responsible, behaviors that felt rational, and they begin to look different, not wrong, but misaligned. Because now you understand something most people never fully process. Your brain is not a neutral decision maker. It is an active filter. And that filter is biased towards survival, not growth. So every financial decision you make passes through that filter first, before logic, before strategy, before long-term thinking, and by the time you become aware of the decision, it has already been shaped. That's why changing outcomes is not about forcing better decisions. It's about recognizing the system that is distorting them, because once you recognize it, you create distance from it, and that distance changes how you interpret your own behavior. You hesitate, and instead of trusting the hesitation, you question it, you feel fear, and instead of obeying it, you analyze it, you want to delay, and instead of justifying it, you observe it. That shift is small, but it's structural, because now the pattern is no longer invisible, and when a pattern becomes visible, it loses part of its control, but not all of it, because the system doesn't disappear. Your brain will still prefer safety. It will still avoid uncertainty. It will still try to protect you from discomfort. That doesn't change. What changes is your relationship with those signals. You stop treating them as instructions and start treating them as data about what your brain is trying to optimize. And once you see that clearly, a new layer of decision-making becomes available, not based on what feels safe, but based on what creates growth. And those two things will often conflict. You will feel discomfort when making the right decision. You will feel uncertainty when taking necessary risks. You will feel resistance when acting in alignment with long-term outcomes. And that's where most people turn back, because they interpret those signals as warnings. But they're not always warnings. Sometimes they are indicators. Indicators that you are moving outside of the system your brain is trying to keep you in. And that system is optimized for stability, not expansion. This is why building wealth often feels unnatural, because it requires operating in a way that contradicts your default programming. It requires acting without immediate reward, accepting uncertainty without immediate clarity, maintaining direction without immediate validation. And none of that feels comfortable. But comfort is not the objective, growth is. And growth requires a different calibration, not of your goals, but of how you interpret your own internal signals. Because if you continue to trust every instinct, every hesitation, every urge to delay, you will continue to reinforce the same pattern, and the pattern will continue to produce the same result, not because you're incapable, but because the system remains unchanged, and systems don't change through intention. They change through awareness, consistent, repeated, conscious awareness of what is happening, while it is happening. That's the only point where intervention is possible, not after the decision, not years later, in the moment. Where the pattern activates, that moment is subtle, almost invisible. A small hesitation, a slight discomfort, a quiet urge to wait. That's the signal. And most people ignore it. They follow it, automatically, and the pattern continues. But if you stop there, even for a second, and you recognize what's happening, you create a gap, and inside that gap, there is a different choice, not the one that feels better, the one that works better. And that choice, repeated over time, is what changes the trajectory, not in one moment, but in many. Because wealth is not the result of one decision, it's the result of a pattern. And until the pattern changes, the outcome doesn't. So the question is no longer, what should I do with my money? The real question is, what is shaping the decisions I keep repeating? Because once you answer that, everything else becomes clearer. Not easier, but clearer. And clarity is where real change begins.